Our first news topic tonight for the weekly news roundup is a court case out of Pennsylvania. Of course, right now I am absconding in the Arizona deserts, but when I'm not in the Arizona deserts, you might find me around central Pennsylvania. So I do like following cases in Pennsylvania, even though I am hard-pressed to find anything really positive coming out of that state. I mean, with all of the problems we have, and we ran, our governor's running around trying to push this, we're going to make it illegal to discriminate against hairstyles. Call me crazy. If I'm going into a hospital or a restaurant, I really would like the employers to discriminate on the hairstyles if their hairstyles haven't been washed in several months. Call me crazy, but there's reasons we don't want to do that. But this particular case is something I have talked about in the past. At least I've talked about something similar to it in the past. And so let's go ahead and chat about it. And Windows Central, and I think Windows Central is actually the place that broke this story, I think. Maybe Kevin was the only one working on Christmas Eve, though. So there's that case. So court says that accepting Google's privacy policy waives privacy rights, allowing warrantless access to search. Okay, there are a few issues with this article title that even caused, and we had a lot of discussion back and forth on our Matrix server. And it does say here that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court allows authorities to access your search history without a warrant. That is not entirely true. They did use a warrant, but they used a warrant that is very questionable. See, the standard that the Fourth Amendment gives for issuing a warrant is that a warrant is specific. It is based on evidence. You would have to go into a judge and say, such and such information has come out against such and such a person. We have this much, or we suspect this much based on this, and this critical point. You go into the judge and the judge signs the warrant, and then you may go and execute your warrant. Well, this is not that type of warrant. This is a type of warrant that is called a reverse keyword search warrant. It is very closely related to the geofence warrants, and we've talked about those in the past. I've always given the scenario, the reason why my new watch here will not connect to some company's database is, let's suppose I go for my morning jog. I mean, not outside the realm of possibility. I get up early in the morning, and before I do anything else, I usually walk. Wherever I am, I usually walk for a few miles. Well, what if I happen to live downtown and my regular walking or running runs me by a bank every day, and there's a bank robbery? So now the police go in and they say, hey, who has been in the vicinity of this bank in this period of time? And if your watch is taking your data and sending up to some company, and then that company likes doing what companies like to do and sharing your data, now that gets tied up and you get investigated now because you're a guy going near a bank, and wow, you're going to be investigated a lot because you're going near that bank a lot. You must be casing that place. Now, the keyword search is sort of like that, but it's a little bit more nefarious. This is, you go to Google and they say, hey, who searched these keywords? Give us a list. Now, this is should be completely unconstitutional, but like the geofence warrants, there is a patchwork of laws in our country that dictate these. So let's go ahead and look at the facts of this particular case, and then I thought I'd highlighted stuff over here. Maybe I didn't. Wow, I thought I'd highlighted stuff in this one. I saw highlights everywhere else. All right, let's go through the cases here. Now, there was a crime, and it was a crime which had a victim, and it was a violent crime. So it was a violent crime with a victim. And the problem is the police didn't have any leads, and they were trying to figure out what to do. And they figure, hey, somebody might have searched for this person's name. And so they go to Google and say, hey, Google, how many people have searched for this name? And Google actually sent them back one name. One person searched for this name. So they okay, based on that, which was not a specific warrant, but a fishing expedition. Based on that, now they start investigating this person, and he smokes cigarettes. So, don't smoke, pro-criminal trip, don't smoke cigarettes, right? He smokes a cigarette, discards a cigarette butt, and the police who are surveilling him go down, pick up the cigarette butt, and they find DNA that matches him to the scene. So he is arrested. And it would appear he probably did it. All right. But the defense says you didn't have a reasonable case to be surveilling my client because you used a reverse keyword search warrant. So when the article says without a warrant, that is not entirely true. They used a reverse keyword warrant in this case. The problem is a reverse keyword warrant is a warrant that is not specific to people and is generic. Because I just thought of a few different scenarios here. What if the victim had recently applied to jobs and job recruiters are looking her up, and so those would show up. Now, of course, if the police would get a list and they see everybody and maybe they surveil all of them and, those guys discard their cigarette butts, but there's no DNA tied back to the scene. Okay, they're off the hook, but you still cannot get past the fact that without any real just cause, they were surveilled. And that's really the facts of the case. What if a recruiter did that, or maybe some random person was doing general searches for names for a fictional book and that shows up? But then what if our assailant actually used something more private, like a DuckDuckGo or a Start Page or a Brave that have a reputation of not storing that data? Well, they would be invisible to that type of warrant, while other random people that may not be involved would be. Now, that wasn't the case here because, he was an idiot and he used Google. And so what if though that guy had a group of friends? This one is a little bit closer, because what if that guy had a group of friends and that a friend comes over to his house and connects his phone to his Wi-Fi to search up that person's name? Well, the IP address is all that was returned, which tied to the assailant here. The IP address could easily tie to anybody who's connected to his network. Well, what if his friend went out and searched that person's name on his Wi-Fi on his device and then goes and grabs some hair out of the guy's comb to frame his friend for whatever reason? So he plants DNA, uses his phone. The geofence warrant would have fingered this person. Now, those are far-fetched, and I am glad the criminal was captured, but we should never be sacrificing our privacy to capture a criminal. Now, the authorities obtained what they say here, a reverse keyword search warrant, allowing them to ask Google to hand over the IP addresses of any user who Googled the name of the victim leading up to the commission of the crime. Now, the judge should not have signed off on the warrant. Google, once they're handed the warrant, has to hand over the data. So just a thought, stop using Google. All right. Not that I'm saying, and I'm not advocating, of course, any form of criminal activity at all. I'm just saying there are many harmless situations that you could get caught up in something. And if this sets a precedent, now police could search for anybody looking up medical conditions, anyone looking up controversial procedures, anyone looking up anything they might happen to want to look up. And that is the hinge pin of the case. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania came down and said, by using Google's terms of service, here you go. It is common knowledge that websites, internet-based applications, and internet service providers collect and then sell user data. So the court says it is common knowledge that these sites are doing this. Therefore, by simply using Google, you give up your right to the Fourth Amendment. That is what Pennsylvania court stands. Now, of course, the only other place, if they want to, they can go up to the Supreme Court and see. And I don't know if they're seeking that out or not. But it did boil down. Most likely this guy did it, and they're looking for every possible means to get him off of the crime. That is a distinct possibility. And so that is really the hot take, though. Do you think the court is right about waiving your constitutional rights by consenting to Google's privacy policy? And they say here, no, the software giant is just too vague about the matter. And this is true. It has been clearly demonstrated. These companies, number one, these companies are going far, 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 far beyond what is reasonable with the data collect. B, you do not oftentimes have a choice in the matter. What if I just get a phone? Like, am I immediately agreeing to Google's terms of service. And the fact is, I can go to google.com right now without having ever read the Google terms of service, entering in information, and if they collect all that data, that's a problem. And so there are too many fundamental questions. And indeed, Tech Policy actually has a good article on this, talking about reverse keyword search warrants and the threat to online privacy. There is a lot in this here, but this is an advocacy group. They're saying, hey, we have to have strong safeguards against this. The problem is that the safeguards that they are recommending run contrary to the interests of the companies like Google, because Google's stance, they want to collect information. This is why Louis Rossmann, when he first understood the implications of privacy, is when he went into his Google account and found a spot in there that had voice recordings of him, people that like, okay, send a text message and blah, 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 into their phone. Like, dude, you're doing this. You may as well just do this. It's just as fast, and then you're not sending your data to Google. And, but he found all of these recordings that were stored for a decade in his account. And that is what caused him to go back and say, hey, we need to take a better stance against this kind of stuff. And so they talk here about the reverse keyword search warrants, and they say this is an investigative digital dragnet tool to compel Google and other major search engine companies to furnish the personal information of users who've conducted a search query related to a crime. The problem here, another problem here, is that sometimes these companies bought and sold and augmented their profiles on people from parties that you have never consented with, you've never agreed to. And if you even knew they existed, you might actually be requesting they delete your data. The problem is they are a shadowy group of data brokers that very few people are aware of. And they say here, because the invasive dragnet requests are more than constitutionally suspect and can have serious implications for civil rights and liberties of U.S. internet users, they ought to be strictly regulated at the federal level. And these are, as I said, close related to geofence warrants, which is where you do a warrant for who has been in the geofence location at a given time. And even those, some states have ruled on the state level that those are constitutional, and some states have ruled they are not. And this is why you should never have your location services turned on. Okay, they're not, I don't know if they can go to like Verizon and say what phone numbers have been in this vicinity. I think they probably can, but it's a lot harder. You just do like Google or Apple or whatever else, because most people are using their Google services and they've turned the location services on their phone. And so you have, to the court's admission there in Pennsylvania, you have consented to all of that. So that is the factor there. All right. And so let's see. So the let me restart that sentence there. However, short of a total statutory ban, there are alternative legislative fixes that can and should be implemented to regulate the use of these warrants and protect privacy of individual online activities to ensure the law keeps pace with the advent of advanced technologies. Okay, so getting into effectively what their stance is on this is that we run into a situation where too much data is collected and held for too long, that even a basic warrant may fail to find information if enough time has passed, but they can query Google for things that you said on the internet 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and they still have access to the data. And so if they're compelled to hand over data by a warrant signed by a judge, Google has too much information, and that is kind of an issue. All right, so there is actually New York has actually proposed a reverse location and reverse keyword search prohibition act. So New York State is looking to deal with this. And if that passes in New York, it will probably come to Pennsylvania, because New York and Pennsylvania collaborate a lot on laws, which is weird, but they do. So breaching Fourth Amendment protections, from unreasonable searches to implicating innocent and unrelated users who search for similar relevant terms, that is the fundamental problem. So they kind of get into it, and I don't know if I want to spend a ton of time going through every little highlight that I've done here, but they have here a couple of points of contention here. And so their first contention, keyword warrants threaten Fourth Amendment rights to be free from unreasonable government searches and risk of implication to innocent users. Because there are valid reasons somebody might look somebody's name up on the internet, particularly if you're famous or something. But you might have gone to high school with the victim and searched up their name to figure out what they're doing now. And now you're going to get caught up in this type of warrant. You're going to be surveilled based on the fact that the police have no other leads, so they're just going fishing. And that's the problem. You see, I'm not as opposed to this if they suspect he might have been the assailant and they said, hey, Google, here's a warrant, give us everything on this person. Then let's search through the history. Let's see the location history. Was he in the vicinity of the victim? Let's see the search history. Did he search it up? But I'm okay with that as a warrant. I mean, you're taking your life in your own hands, giving it all to Google, but at least they came into the warrant and said, hey, this is a person we suspect. We are now gathering more evidence. That is a specific warrant that is justified. But this dragnet, we don't know who done it, so let's just throw out a bunch of dragnets and see what comes on in the net, and that's kind of the problem. So the Fourth Amendment constitutional search requirements are grounded in probable cause and particularity. That's what I'd already said. You have to come in and say, we suspect this person of this thing based on this set of circumstances that we have, and it's sound. And that's why a judge is supposed to sign off on this kind of stuff. All right, so the problem here is that because these are so easy, it's likely that these searches will grow broader in scope and more demanding as they are allowed to go through, as in Supreme Court cases. And as a result of the practice, as described by the EFF, as an overbroad fishing expedition against unspecified targets can subject innocent users to unreasonable searches. That is where I think that the Pennsylvania court got this wrong. All right, so under this principle of the First Amendment stuff, some people are concerned that if a government is actually able to come in here and do a keyword search for just a random name, what stops them from doing a keyword search to see who's looking up either religions or parties or everything else? That is a fundamental question that we need to address with this, because at what point in time does the system break down or not? So Fourth Amendment third-party doctrine does not recognize a reasonable expectation of privacy. This is a fundamental challenge, that third-party doctrine, which allows a government to buy information or access information from a third party. And this is another reason why you should be weary about giving anything back. So there's always that. All right, the third principle they have here is keyword warrants threaten access to sensitive information. So, of course, they put in their headlines these hot button reproductive and abortion stuff. And at least in the text, they got deeper into more relevant things like health conditions, religious beliefs, financial stability, other questions and things like that. So very pleased to see they get into that, because you don't really want to look up on Google what this weird thing is growing out of the side of your leg. That's kind of a problem. You may or may not, like some countries, what if the government over in a principal Islamic country wants to look up everybody who has looked up the Bible? Which is in many of them a punishable offense in some of those situations. We don't want the governments to be able to gather such information. Obviously, in America, I think we're still fairly grounded on religious freedoms to some degree anyway. But there is some questions about how far this could go if you start allowing it on one basis. Will that also not be allowed in many other bases? And so users often rely on search queries to secure answers to sensitive questions. They may feel uncomfortable even approaching a human confidant with such information, including friends and families and doctors. They also said down here that many people, it's down here, 89% of U.S. citizens search for health information online before seeking medical care. So could you identify those types of things? So in their recommendations, this is where I kind of disagree with a little bit of their approach. In their recommendations, beyond prohibiting government use of reverse search keywords, legislation to mandate tech companies such as search engines implement stringent safeguards to better protect users' personal information. Yeah. they're not going to let go of that information, which primarily they want to reduce the amount of information they hold and force the companies to delete it. The problem is that's not in Google's best interest. Google's best interest is to collect and store as much data on everybody as they possibly can. And that happens to be their case. Now, I highlighted this in red because this one here is the part that's directly contrary. So tech companies should be required to enact data minimization policies that incorporate the use of auto-delete controls to give users the choice to have search engines automatically and continuously delete their data. These big companies, this is not their interest. They want to collect as much data and hold on to it for as long as conceivably possible, because the more data they have, it's conceived as being more profitable to the company. This is contrary. Now, this is where, like, Pennsylvania, back to Pennsylvania, we have these stupid state inspections required on our cars, that the inspections are done by the mechanics. And so it opens up a lot of potential abuse. And I can say I probably, as a younger man, have had some of these auto mechanics take advantage of me. I just need a car inspection. Everything's running perfectly fine. I need a car inspection. You need to replace your struts. I have never replaced struts in cars outside of times that I've taken it to big box mechanics. There's a thought, apparently you don't need to replace those things, except when they say, hey, another car's in, a revenue's low. Let's just replace struts on the next 3 cars that come in. Why not? And you are forced to do what they say to do, or you will not be allowed to drive your car. Okay. California solved this problem, that the inspection stations cannot do repairs, nor can they recommend repair stations. And repair stations cannot do anything with inspection stations. So you go to a inspection station in California, and then the inspection station in California will give you a list of anything that needs done. You choose your mechanic that does the list. You get the mechanic to sign off on the list. You go back to the inspection station, and they give you your sticker. Wow, California has solved some problems, believe it or not. Right. But telling Google to delete information when Google's primary means is to sell your profile based on the information they have, that's an exercise in futility, ladies and gentlemen. That will not happen. All right. So, of course, they're dwelling on about that, but it's contrary to their views. Now, create more avenues for anonymous browsing. This is really, and this is why it's like I can make a lot more jest about this, because I don't use Google very much, okay? I had to use it recently to look up some weird programming type stuff that I just couldn't get good results anywhere else. But for the most part, I dig 3 or 4 engines deep before I touch the G word. All right. Of course, they do have that comment on Google's incognito mode. Google's incognito mode did not stop Google from collecting information. It prevented anybody from your house from collecting information. So you could search for the dreaded P word in incognito mode and the people in your house wouldn't know it, but Google still would. Okay. That's how that sums itself down. But you use, in this case, they say DuckDuckGo, Brave, Start Page. These are search engines that will not be collecting all that data, that will not let you get caught up. And then I just had one other article here that had just the connection between the reverse search warrants, the geofencing, and they actually had a couple of current ongoing cases. Now, this one here in Pennsylvania is not listed among their cases here, but that is really the principle. And so there is... I think my state got this one wrong, but go figure, whatever it happens to be. Well, you can find the link to the full stream in the description down below. And with that, thanks for watching.